Let's set the stage for talking about finding the positive in failure with a review of The Champion's Creed by Tom Hopkins. We are not judged by the number of times we fail, but by the number of times we succeed. The number of times we succeed is in direct proportion to the number of times we fail to keep going. There are at least 3 negative results that come from failure. First is the fear of failure. Like deer in the headlights, it can paralyze you. Second is the emotional ramification of failure because it can sap your confidence, self-image, and drive. The third negative result is when you don't learn anything from it. Keep in mind before we start this chapter, failure either holds you back or pushes you on. It is your choice, and it is not a choice you get to avoid. Every morning you get to make that choice again. We will take a look at how to overcome the paralyzing and emotional impact issue of failure, but only after we address the much bigger issue of learning from our failures. The only reason salespeople don't learn from their failures is they are unwilling to. They find that looking at what went wrong and understanding and accepting their role in the failure is a process that makes them feel deeply insecure. They avoid it like kids avoid algebra. Too often they feel the best way to get past the blame they feel is to move on to the next customer as quickly as possible. Blaming yourself is the polar opposite of accepting your responsibility and being accountable. Salespeople who are quick to blame themselves are quick to blame everything else as well. Try to imagine a football team where nobody was willing to watch game films. All the players just blamed themselves or their coaches, the weather, or just chalked up their lost game to bad luck. As absurd as this approach to winning football games sounds, it happens every day in the sales game. Hey, listen, there are major companies that have never done a single in-depth loss review, even when they keep failing at the same kinds of deals over and over again. They have institutionalized failure because they choose not to learn from it. When asked, they can wax eloquent about how their competitors are better funded, ruthless, or underhanded. They become really good at convincing themselves and others that they are not to blame for their poor sales performance. Not only that, there are companies out there that don't believe there is any such thing as selling failure. I'm not kidding. One of the largest medical equipment companies in the U.S. looks at every sale they lose to a competitor as an engineering problem. Their logic is that everyone buys their products because their products are better than anyone else's. Thus, if a prospective customer chooses a competitor, it must mean that the competitor has a better product. Their response is, let's get the engineers in here and fix this sales problem. By the way, this is the same company that spends a fortune every year to provide product training for their sales force, but less than 2% of their training budget on sales training. To learn from failure, you must move your focus away from the result of the failure and focus on the selling process. Start by understanding that customers don't cause lost sales. Salespeople do. In most cases, it is because of a breakdown in the selling process. So focus your attention to spotting where in the process the train left the tracks. During your training, you will learn and practice many ways to optimize your role in the selling process. But right here, I want to give you an assignment that will be a vital key to your long-term sales success. Start a journal. Keep it with you. In that journal, I only want you to record 2 categories of information. First, I want you to do a postmortem on every lost sale you experience and identify where you think you went wrong. Avoid any reference to external conditions and record only what you would and could have done differently. Next, I want you to put into your journal the same sales cycle details of every successful sale. Do the same kind of reflective thinking about what worked and your role in the successful sale. We will teach you how to be effective at this kind of analysis, but you must make it a commitment, a constant. A habit. Think of someone trying to become a master chef. They are required to keep a diary to record what they learn, what worked and what didn't work. Now, imagine how that chef would feel if after graduation the chef lost his or her personal recipe book with all his discoveries and observations. Okay, now it's gut check time again. If you've come up with reasons why you don't need to start your journal or you just don't think it's worth the effort, it's probably time for you to reflect on why you're taking this course. Studies have shown that 55% of salespeople are not suited for their job and will not succeed. Other studies have debunked the concept of the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule says that 80% of revenue comes from 20% of salespeople. The fact is, 87% of sales revenue is produced by 13% of salespeople. Which category are you part of? What category do you want to be a part of? If you're sitting back trying to find reasons why you don't have to or want to adopt the behaviors, habits, skills, and attitudes available to you in this course, then I have good news for you. Your satisfaction is guaranteed, so you or your company can get a full refund. We told you this course is not about theory or about tips and techniques. This course is about acting on the things you learn here. You've been through 5 chapters, all dealing with the power of the positive. So if you're still looking for ways to avoid making changes, this would be a good time to save you and your company some money. Now for the rest of us, let's take a look at the impact that fear of failure has on your sales performance. First, let's recognize that fear is always associated with risk. There's usually an equal or higher component of excitement associated with risk as well. Every performer knows the feeling. It's always there. Professionals learn how to harness this fear/excitement emotion and use it to up their performance. If you don't get an emotional high after completing a sale, you may be in the wrong business. So if fear is associated with risk, and risk is always a component of selling, how do we keep the fear of failure from paralyzing us? Let's start with the easy part. Number-induced fear. Anyone who has spent any time selling knows that, to varying degrees, selling is a numbers game. The numbers that count are not the end result numbers. If you have a sales quota of $1 million a year, the annual amount is not the most important number. Focusing on a $1 million quota can be intimidating because it can look like a mountain too tall. Here are 2 much more important numbers. The first number is $4,000. That's how much you have to sell today. The most important number is $2,000 because, given you plan to take a 2 weeks vacation this year, that is how much you need to sell between the time you start selling today and noon. A $2,000 target before noon today provides the energy to act now. Remember this, you can overcome fear with action. Remember, take action to alleviate fear. Now that we've covered dealing with fear of failure through action, let's talk about dealing with the emotional impact of our failures. Let's go back to the performer model that we've used to illustrate how to deal with fear. Every person performing at a very high level, whether it's a ballerina, baseball player, musician, or salesperson, must learn how to separate their performance from their person. Coaches of world-class athletes teach them how to take direct criticism about their performance without internalizing it. They're taught to think, this was the quality or success of tonight's performance, instead of, this was my quality or success tonight. Soichiro Honda, founder of Honda Motor Company, said, success is 99% failure. His attitude and philosophy demonstrates that our failures are part of the fabric of our success and should be seen as contributors, not threats. Failure is integral to not only achieving success, but also to appreciating it. In many cases, the fear of emotional risk can be controlled effectively by renewed focus on the goal. It is a well-documented fact that people who see themselves as participating in a larger mission, in something bigger than themselves, are more resilient. To the degree that we can link our profession and everything we do in life to a higher purpose, we can be more on purpose and can endure more risk and more fear. If you know the real why that drives what you do, you will find risk-taking easier and more exciting. While each person's why may be different, the why is never to make money. In some cases, your why is about what money allows you to do, feel, and experience. It can't be about the money itself because green paper is just not that compelling. Overcome fear of failure by choosing what you're willing to risk. Make failure your friend because you are a risk taker or a risk maker, and you know that the surest failure is not taking risks. Keep in mind that only a person who can risk can be free. Think of risk as the bridge between success and failure. Risk is the choice to be different and to stand out and leave the crowd behind. When you look back over your life, risk always seems larger before you take it. The goal of every sales professional must be make failure your friend. Olympic skiing champion Phil Mayer wrote a book about his experiences in overcoming fears and failures and achieving his goals. Here are 6 things we should learn from him. 1. If you fear losing, you will train for winning. 2. The greatest setbacks can be the reason for the greatest achievements. A setback is a setup for a comeback. 3. Excuses don't matter. 4. Never hold back. Give everything every time. What are you holding back? Why? 5. Your mistakes become failures when we fail to respond to them correctly. 6. There are many ways to be a winner, but there is only one way to be a loser. That is to fail and not look beyond that failure. Before we start our exercises on this chapter, let's review what our attitude about failure should be. Keep in mind, there is power in learning how to deal with failure, the fear of failure, and with the strong emotions that experiencing failure can generate. As salespeople, you have chosen a business that involves risk. How well you deal with it will determine how far you can go. Your attitude about failure will determine your altitude. Every failure gets you closer to success. You must learn from every failure. If you make failure your friend, you will always find far more successes than failures. Your successes will be bigger because you set higher goals. Failure is never permanent. Failure is an isolated incident. Appreciate failure. Lighten up. Have a positive attitude about failure. All great successes have a history of failures. Your exercise for this chapter is to get your fears on paper. Write them down. Give them voice. Prioritize them. Put your worst fear at the top and work down. Take the top 3 and write a worst-case scenario for each, describing what's the worst that could materialize from each fear. Now, put today's date next to each one. Next, I want you to put an expiration date next to each fear on your list. That is the date by which it will no longer be viable and is ready to be discarded. To be sure we end a chapter on the power of the positive with a little something positive to go out on, here is what I want you to do next. Answer this question and write your answers below those fears you just noted. If you saw failure as a positive experience, what would you attempt to achieve?